Good morning, everybody, and welcome back to your Lunch Break Live. My name is Ivana. If you're new here, if you're not, thanks for coming back. Today is Friday, TGIF. I think we all feel that way this week. And today I have a very special guest. You might recognize him, but if you do not, this is UAB's Dr. Michael Saag. Now, Dr. Saag is an infectious disease specialist. He has been well known in the medical communities for years, but really this past year in 2020 is when so many people in Alabama that were not familiar with you, Dr. Saag, now know your name and you're a household name. So I can't imagine how it feels to be thrust in the spotlight like that, but you have kind of become the go-to person for medical information here in Alabama.
Well, it is a little bit surprising and unnerving to some degree, but thanks for having me on.
I have to start out with saying that actually on New Year's Eve something happened to me, and I was at a restaurant outdoors, socially distanced, etc., with my husband, and somebody at the next table about who was probably a couple yards away, but they were loud. I'm loud, so I get it. There were two ladies, and one was saying that she was a little bit hesitant about getting her vaccine, and the other lady sitting at the table said, "Well, Dr. Saag is getting his, so I'm getting mine."
Mm.
And I thought that it was so funny that people maybe who are even a little bit hesitant about these vaccines are looking to you to see if you are getting it and if you are recommending people get it. So I'll just start out with that and ask you, what are your thoughts on the vaccine?
Well, this vaccine's a miracle. It's a godsend. It's going to be our exit out of this horrific pandemic. But I will underscore the word miracle. I mean, we go around our whole lives, for those who are religious, they read the Bible and they see miracles happening there. Other parts of life may also have historical miracles, whatever. But this is a miracle in our lifetime. And it's also a scientific triumph because this disease has only been with us for about a year. And it was almost exactly a year ago today that the sequence for this virus was released. And Tony Fauci and his team sat down the next day on January 11th, designed this vaccine. It was produced in the laboratory within 2 days, and then it started going into trials in animals and then into people, and it was starting in March. And so we have this thing that not only was designed and tested, but it worked. So here's what I would say to people who are hesitant, and I get it. It's new. This whole thing is new. It's overwhelming. But here's the thing. Imagine if the vaccine trials had failed. We tried them. They just didn't work. They didn't protect. And actually, most vaccines that get tried don't work or don't work very well. Then we would be left with the biggest surge we've had, which is what we're going through right now, and no end in sight. So next Thanksgiving, next Christmas would be just as bad, if not worse, than what it was this year. And then it doesn't necessarily end at the end of 2021. I don't know how long it would go, but I don't see a reason that it's going to magically disappear or burn itself out until most people are infected. And that to me is unacceptable. So flip it. We do have a vaccine. Not only does it works spectacularly well. And the safety profile is really quite good. So we should embrace this and run with it because it is our exit strategy. It's our ramp off the highway of this horrible pandemic.
I have to call out one of my commenters here. TJ said he received the Moderna vaccine yesterday, sore arm, but feel fine otherwise. And I want to call you out, TJ, that he has been a little bit skeptical. He was not sure that he was going to get his vaccine. So he did it and says he feels good. So I just think it's always, important to talk about people who maybe be a little bit skeptical at first, but then realize that maybe the pros outweigh the cons here.
Yeah, I think so. And to your point about not just me, but everybody at UAB that I know has gotten the vaccine. We've got to eat at our own restaurant, right? If we are making the food, if we're bringing up this stuff and we're saying to people, you should use it, we should be the first in line to demonstrate that we're confident that this vaccine not only will work, but that it's safe. And it is.
I'm glad you brought that up because I saw a few people that were asking earlier, why would you take a vaccine and then use that dose when we know we don't have a lot, when you have already had COVID-19, you've already been infected with it?
It's a great question. And the answer is twofold. One, the immunity from natural infection, like I had back in March, wanes, usually within 4 to 6 months. Now, my particular response was strong in terms of antibody and that type of thing that we've measured ever since I was sick. And I've donated blood and plasma almost monthly to follow how my immune system has reacted for scientific purposes. But I do know that it works, but it does wane. And the corollary of that is that people do get a second course of this infection. It's not like you have lifelong immunity afterwards. There are people, several who we've seen at UAB, who are definitely on their second round of infection. So people who've had it before should get the vaccine. The key is you should wait at least 90 to 120 days, 3 to 4 months before getting the vaccine. You don't want to get it immediately afterwards. So that's the first reason. And the second reason is, as I've just alluded to, that I should be demonstrating my confidence in the vaccine because I'm out literally promoting it because it is our way out of this epidemic.
Now, I've got some other questions for you about vaccines and the rollout, but I want to get to a few first of people who have commented here. And I've got one from Tyler, said, should I get vaccinated if my wife is 6 months pregnant, or should I wait until she can also get it?
Well, yes, Tyler, I would get it as soon as you can. And your wife being pregnant is an interesting thing. Like most studies, pregnant women are excluded from the trial. So we don't have direct evidence of safety during pregnancy. On the other hand, the OBGYN leadership in the country and the world is recommending that women consider being vaccinated while pregnant. Why? Because the disease itself, if they were to catch it while they're pregnant, can cause trouble. And you want to avoid that trouble, right? So you weigh out the risk of picking up COVID and getting really sick versus the risk of having a side effect to the vaccine with potential, literally potential harm, perhaps to the baby in utero. So we are recommending to the pregnant women we're following at UAB that they consider it. We're not saying you should definitely do it unless you want to, but we're offering it. And I think that's the right approach. And then Tyler, to you, if you get vaccinated, then you're not likely to bring the virus home because most of the transmission of COVID is happening within the home where people, don't wear their mask. They walk in the door, they take it off, they put it down. And that's where a lot of the transmission is somebody inadvertently picked it up in the community and brought it home.
And to Tyler, I'll let you know, and anybody else, if you want more information on vaccinations, kind of what Dr. Saag was saying about the potential there to get that vaccine, even if you are pregnant or breastfeeding. I had a great conversation with Dr. Jeremy Rogers from Grandview's Medical Center ER the other day. Y'all should definitely check that one out. But moving on to talking about the rollout, Dr. Saag, we know that maybe this rollout is a little bit, we should say, slower than most people wanted. Alabama has got about 20% of their allocated vaccine doses that have already been used. And there are people that say, why is it taking so long?
I don't know, honestly. I'm a little bit surprised as well. The world or universe that I see is the UAB universe, and UAB was allocated 10,750 vaccine doses. And I think almost all of them have been used, over 95%. So I'm seeing it being used, and there's new allocation, as I understand, that just came in this week. And I'm sure that's going to be used. I suspect the problem is in that distribution from the state health department to the local site. And it's probably at the local site that may be having trouble with logistics. This is a tall order. This is not straightforward to just kind of set up and say, come on in and get your shot. You've got to have a process in place. You've got to have the right kind of personnel lined up to give the shots who are qualified. And you have to have the forms to fill out and all that stuff. So I'm hopeful that that's being worked out right now. I know my phone is ringing off the hook in terms of people saying, when can I get it? When can I get it? I love the fact that people want the vaccine. That's good. We just have to make sure we get it out to folks and into people's arms.
We actually spoke the other day with Dr. Landers of the Alabama Department of Public Health, and she talked a little bit about this rollout and kind of spoke to what you did, is that not every site in the state is the same that's getting the doses. We know in Alabama, we have so many different regions of the state that have different geographical issues, rural areas getting these vaccines to and from, and so many other situations that have to be taken into account. So it might not be as easy as a lot of people think, like, oh, you just get the vial and put it in somebody's arm. So,
Yeah, and it may be a little bit like testing where we stumbled a little bit coming out of the gate, but now getting a test is relatively straightforward. It's just a learning curve, and there's a lot of pressure right now on the health systems in general because of the caseload. So where everyone's juggling a lot of things at once, but I know the vaccines are a top priority, as they should be.
what about the longevity of the medicine from that vaccine in the body?
So there's the vaccine is something called mRNA, at least the two that are out now. It's a small fragment of genetic material of just from the virus, very small, gets put into the arm, it goes into the muscle cells, and for a very brief moment in time, maybe less than a day, starts producing protein. And that protein is the spike protein of the virus that the immune system says, whoa, what's that? Goes and attacks it. And then now the immune system is trained. It knows that if it ever encounters that thing, it's ready. So it's kind of like the military doing some espionage, knowing what the enemy is. And if it shows up, boom, it'll just knock it out. That's how it works. So the vaccine, the genetic material is destroyed by the immune system, by the cells within a day or two. So it doesn't last. What does last, and this is what we want, is the immunity. So that will last, my guess is, for more than a year or up to a year. And because that immune response, when it's been studied, is actually stronger than the immune response from having the infection itself, like I did back in March. And then that's another reason why I got vaccinated.
We have a lot of people talking about the two different brands of vaccines that are available right now. That's Pfizer and Moderna. If you look at the Alabama Department of Public Health's dashboard that shows the vaccines given, you'll see in the very beginning, at the end of December, it was all Pfizer. And then it started being a little bit more split up as those Moderna vaccines were available. So a lot of people ask, is one better than the other? Is one brand more situated to people, say, 65 and over than the other brand?
Not really. There's a few subtle differences that if you start going with a very fine-tooth comb into the clinical trial data, you'll see a little bit of difference. Bottom line is they're the same. But if you get the Pfizer for your first shot, you want to get the Pfizer for your second shot. You get Moderna for the first shot, you want to get Moderna for the second shot. But here's the thing. They're both mRNA vaccines, that genetic material I just described, and they both work in the exact same way, and their efficacy, their ability to protect, is the same, and it's 95%. I just want to make it clear that most vaccines are maybe 60%, 70% protective. This is 95%. Maybe only the measles vaccine is a little bit better. So this is about as good as it gets as far as vaccines go. And the side effects, as you mentioned earlier, most people are just getting some pain and redness at the site that's gone within a day or two. Some people, like when I took it, I did have some fever and chills as if my COVID had come back, but that in retrospect only lasted about 18 hours and was gone. So I think for people like me who have had the infection before, I think we're more likely to have a reaction because our immune system is well familiar with this thing and we're just boosting it along. But for people who've never had COVID, the side effect profile is really quite small. And I will mention as well that the studies themselves excluded people like me who were known to have infection before. There was about 2% who had an asymptomatic infection who got in. We know that because they had some antibody on entry, but we were excluded. And some of the future studies like the J&J vaccine, and I believe in AstraZeneca, they're allowing people in who have had COVID before. So we'll know more specifically, but we'll learn as we go.
One question that you said I wanted to ask, if you can repeat, what is that time frame for when you get coronavirus to when you should be able to get vaccinated?
3 to 4 months.
3 to 4 months. So we talked about the brands of the vaccines, how there's not a huge difference between those two things, except you can't mix and match. You can't get one Pfizer, one Moderna, or vice versa. You mentioned those other two brands, Johnson & Johnson and AstraZeneca. Any idea when those will be approved for use here in the United States?
My understanding is the Johnson & Johnson vaccine is winding down its studies right now, and I think it's going to go to the FDA sometime in January. So I suspect, assuming all looks good and it's working really well, that like the Moderna and the Pfizer, that it'll be available to us, I would guess, in early February if things stay on track. AstraZeneca, as a lot of people know, has been approved in the UK. It's a British company, so they pushed it forward. Their data are still being compiled. I think they're going to be applying to the US FDA, but I think there's a study that's winding down right now that they're going to wait for the results of, but I think it'll be out in March. Put all things together, I think by the time we get into the spring, there'll be 4 products available to us. We'll see how they compare one to the other, especially in these subpopulations, like you were asking earlier about older versus others. We may see some nuanced differences there, but the good news is we're going to have a whole lot more vaccine options available to us and much more product available come April and May.
Do we know who should not take vaccines, whether that is somebody with maybe a severe peanut allergy, somebody with cancer, or other conditions such as those?
Well, at least for the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines, it's a really fancy term called excipient. The only thing in the vaccine that is not the genetic material itself is something called polyethylene glycol, or PEG. So somebody who has had any kind of reaction to that, those are the people who might have that reaction where they get a little bit of swelling right afterwards. They maybe get a little short-winded. That's why we want to observe people for 15 minutes after the vaccine. So that's another challenge at the site, that they have to have an ability to give the shot and then observe for 15 minutes. But that's where it happens. There have been no deaths due to that type of reaction. But if somebody knows that they're allergic to polyethylene glycol, or PEG, then they should talk to the site or talk to their doc ahead of time. But there are ways to do that safely. Other types of allergies are not at play because this is a very specific product, the polyethylene glycol, and there's no peanut in there. There's no thimerosal like other vaccines have. There's none of the other excipients, if you will, that are there. So it's safe for most everybody.
I'm going to ask you this one because I have to. This is my mother-in-law's question, so I got to ask you. What about transplant patients? Are they safe to get this vaccine?
Absolutely. And in fact, we encourage them to be more towards the front of the line, because anybody who's on an immunosuppressive drug, which is required by definition for transplants to keep from organ rejection after they get transplanted, they're more susceptible to the ravages of COVID if they become infected. So we want to prevent that. So they should be in the front of the line.
Next question, I want to completely take the politics out of it. I think we've all had a week where we just don't want to think about the divisiveness in politics right now. So let's take that out of it. But this morning we did have news that the president-elect says that he might consider that the next vaccine dosage that come out, they're going to give them all out and not hold back that second dose. What do you think about that? Is that safe?
It's probably safe. The question I think everybody has is, will it be effective or efficacious? This is where politics aside, gets into medical science and clinical trials. If you look real carefully, when you look at the package insert, that little folded up pamphlet that's in a lot of your medicine if you buy it over the counter, and it's all that fine print that nobody ever reads. Those are the data from the clinical trials. And the FDA basically takes whatever the study had as its entry criteria and its approach, a dose 3 weeks apart, 4 weeks apart, and then that's the rule. That becomes the way you give it. In our clinical trials, we didn't look at giving it one dose today and then waiting 3, 4, 5 months for the second dose. So we don't really know. That would be an experiment in real time in the real world, which I'm not saying is a terrible idea, because necessity is the mother of invention, and we have a huge need right now. What we can't say is whether it would work. My best guess is that it probably will be okay. Why do I say that? Because in the Pfizer and Moderna studies, when somebody got their first dose, you can see that in the first 12 days, there was no difference in terms of new cases. The lines were superimposed on the graph for the first 12 days. So same number of cases 12 days after the first dose. After day 12, the placebo group continued to rise almost like a ski slope, but the vaccine group went flat. Hardly any new cases after day 12. And that was before the second vaccination. And then they got their second vaccine and it stayed flat further. So my sense is that the immunity kicks in on about day 13 in terms of being protective. And that makes sense biologically as well. The question is, what does a second dose do? The answer probably is it just boosts it and makes it more enduring or durable. And so if that's the case, maybe we can find that we can stretch that out. But I think everybody has to understand that that's based on a really good guess, but it is a guess.
You mentioned a few minutes ago the ingredients in these vaccines, and if you were allergic to them, you should not take that vaccine. Where can people find a list of those ingredients to make sure there's nothing they're allergic to that is in those vaccines?
Well, I can tell you the place might be on the FDA website or perhaps the manufacturer's website, and again, that fine print. But I can tell you that the only thing really in it, besides the active mRNA, which nobody's going to be allergic to because we got that all over our body every day, and a little bit of lipid, which we also have over our body. The main excipient, the main ingredient is just this polyethylene glycol, the PEG. That's it.
I see this comment. I want to ask if you agree, because I know you have had most of your career has been focused in infectious disease, but also in HIV AIDS and in that space, in that research where you've worked for a long time and done some great work there. I have a comment here from Ellery who says, what a strange time. This is a time when experts have delivered several vaccines to fix this, but then our population lacks trust in those vaccines and in that help. I have to wonder, you have worked in a field for so long that there is not a cure. There is not a vaccine that can fix things like AIDS. What do you feel like in this situation where there is a possible way out of this and so many people don't trust it?
I can understand hesitancy to trust. We're in a strange time right now where, and again, politics aside, people don't know what the truth is sometimes. We have, in the course of our dialogue especially on social media, trusted voices have been assassinated. I mean, people who we should be relying on have had their integrity attacked solely for political reasons, in my opinion. And that creates confusion because the social media landscape will start firing out things. And if they're said often enough and strongly enough, people start to think, I wonder if that's real. I can tell you that you can trust the voices like Tony Fauci or the CDC. Those are our anchors of truth. And we need to rely on that, especially when we're in a public health crisis like we are. So to me, the biggest disservice that we've had, one of the biggest, is the assassination of those trusted voices. The second point is that coming back to HIV, what we're seeing in this miraculous development of a COVID vaccine is the culmination of 35 to 40 years of work in AIDS and learning about virology and learning about how vaccines operate and how to design the clinical trials and how to make them safe and effective and efficient in terms of getting them done. And all that knowledge, all that wherewithal was applied to the development of this vaccine. So we're building on the shoulders of not just AIDS research, but hepatitis C and a lot of other things that have been quite successful over the last 35 to 40 years. Yes, we do not have an HIV vaccine now, but we can credit the effort to create an HIV vaccine to the development of this COVID vaccine. And I'm enormously proud of that. And I'm very excited about it.
So you think that this research that has been used around coronavirus could elevate the research on HIV, AIDS, and other right now uncurable diseases?
Absolutely. To get specific, we've never had an mRNA vaccine before, ever. Never had it. So that's what I was saying, that when this thing was developed, it was 10 years in development. the concept of an mRNA vaccine. And when Fauci and his group and the group at BioNTech in Germany threw together the Moderna and Pfizer products, respectively, they were basing it on animal models and some other things that have been developed for years. And they said, okay, this should work. So they did it, and remarkably, it did work. So we can take this information and we can start developing mRNA vaccines for almost any type of infectious disease. It's so straightforward. I won't say easy, but straightforward to design. And you use this thing almost like a cassette. You shuttle in or shuttle out what it is you want the immune system to see, and then you use the same technology and you produce it. It could be for dengue fever. I could go on for days about all the possible infections that we heretofore have not had a vaccination for, and now we'll have it. Plus, other vaccines that aren't quite as effective that I've alluded to earlier, maybe even influenza, might transition to an mRNA platform. That means all the people who are allergic to eggs, who don't get influenza vaccine because of that, now that's out of the way. And we can also be more smart. We can be smarter about how we do this by using this mRNA technology. So this is a quantum leap in the field of vaccinology.
So your message, it sounds like, is that the mRNA vaccines is a step above some of the vaccines we've been doing with the kind of dead or weak part of the virus, and not a step below.
It's clearly a step above. I'd say it's an order of magnitude better in terms of its effectiveness and its safety.
I'll give you one final question, and I know you got your scrubs on. You are ready to go to work. And this is from Buddy, and I think a lot of people feel the same way. He says, what percentages do we need to get to of vaccination to get back to, quote, normal, whatever normal is? Do we need 50% of the population vaccinated, 60%? What do you think?
Well, my best guess is 75 to 80%. But let me tell you just briefly how that estimate is made. What it relies on is how efficient does the virus transmit from person one to person two. If it's hard to transmit, then you don't need quite as many people protected. But if it's easy to transmit, like say measles, or in this case, this new variant of coronavirus that's more contagious, then you need a higher proportion of people vaccinated to protect. So with the new information about how easy this virus is to protect and how much this virus is in our community right now, we're going to need about 70 to 80% of people to be vaccinated to get that herd immunity, as we've heard about so much. And that's what we'll see when we see the curves coming down of new cases. That's what we need. But even along the way to get to 70, 80%, we're going to have benefit, because that person, that individual who has the vaccination and is protected, they won't get sick. Or if they're in that 5% who do get sick, it's mild disease. So this thing protects against severe disease and death because of the prior immunity that's there from the data that we see so far. So there's two reasons to get the vaccine. One is to protect yourself against getting infected or certainly having symptomatic infection. And two, to prevent you from bringing this home to your family or to our community. And in the long run, we get rid of this thing once and for all. And if we do it well and we do it right, Thanksgiving and Christmas next year should be back to normal. And that's something worth looking forward to and something to celebrate from this year's Christmas miracle.
Great words to end on there, Doctor. We appreciate you so much. And I'm telling you, you're going to have to start penciling us in over here now that you are our medical experts here in Alabama. You're our local celebrity, but we appreciate you.
Thank you. It's great being with you, Ivana, and thanks for the opportunity.
Everybody, thank you so much for watching. Stay safe this weekend. We'll see you Monday.